I'd like to echo the words that have already been spoken this morning regarding how thankful we are that you're joining us for this wonderful period of worship. And I cannot think of a song more appropriate for us than Great is Thy Faithfulness. Throughout all of the ups and downs and tumults of our life, God is always faithful to us, and we rejoice. Thank you so much for your presence here, either physically or online this morning. I'm going to be away for the next 3 weeks, or by being away, I mean I'm going to be out of the pulpit for the next 3 weeks. Lord willing, I'll be back here on the 16th of August. Next Sunday, as Mitch indicated, we're going to be honoring our graduating high school seniors. Long overdue, but we want to show these kids how much we love them. This is a long-standing West Side tradition to honor our graduating seniors, and though we were not able to do it earlier in the year, next Sunday morning we're going to be doing that. Please make sure you drop them a card or a gift in one of those hampers in the back. And we appreciate John White, as he always does such a magnificent job with this service. He'll be coordinating the service next Sunday morning for us. Following that, I'm going to take a couple of weeks away and off as I recuperate from the surgery that Mitch mentioned. And without going into lengthy detail about that, may I just ask sincerely and humbly for your prayers. Any improvement will be a significant improvement for me, and I have great confidence in my physician, but I have even greater confidence in the great physician. And I really mean that. I really do. And I pray very much that when I return on the 16th and I say it's good to see you, that I will in fact see you. Amen. And I believe that, Jim. I really do. I really do. So please, I appreciate your prayers, and not only for me, but for all of the others that have been mentioned as well. I know they are so receptive of your prayers. Have you ever stood at the sunset with the sky billowing red, seen the clouds suspended like feathers? Then I say, you've seen Jesus, my Lord. I love the words of that song. Do you have a favorite place to watch a sunset? Where would that be? I've had the occasion several times to preach in the West Indies, the islands of St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and Barbados. And the scene of the sun setting over the Caribbean Sea has made an indelible impression upon my mind. I can still picture that so clearly. A little closer to home, I enjoy going and standing on Sunset Point on Mount Nebo in Yell County, watching the sun drop below the Boston Mountains of western Arkansas. But this morning, I don't want to talk to you about a sunset. Rather, I want to talk to you about a day the sun stood still. Now, this particular event occurs in Joshua chapter 10. So let me give us just a little bit of background as to what's going on in Joshua chapter 10. And I've got a slide with a map of Canaan that might be beneficial to you. But Joshua is leading the Israelites as they have come into the land of Canaan, led by the mighty, powerful hand of God. God has given them victories over Jericho and over Ai. The Israelites have stood in the valley of Shechem, where between the Mount of Blessing and the Mount of Cursing, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, they have recited the blessings and cursings of God and renewed the covenant of God in obedience to the commands of Moses in Deuteronomy 27, verses 1 through 8. And now they are ready to embark upon what will be the greatest strategic campaign in their conquest of Canaan. Joshua's strategy is one of divide and conquer. What his plan is to move through the hill country of Canaan, the central region, including cities like Gibeon, Jerusalem, Lachish, Hebron, and Eglon. Now, after he's done that, he'll go to the south, conquer that part of the land of Canaan, and then he'll end up by taking the northern part of the land of Canaan until Israel occupies the entire land. But what we're talking about specifically in this event is this central campaign. Of all the events that are pictured in the Bible of a miraculous nature, I believe this event about the sun standing still probably causes greater scorn among skeptics than nearly any other miracle. You know, people will chuckle when you talk about a man in a boat full of animals during a worldwide flood. And people might even chuckle when you talk about a man who has been swallowed by a great fish. Or they might shake their head negatively when you talk about a man walking on the water as Jesus did or as Peter did. But when you talk about the sun standing still for a day, almost a whole day, the doubters howl in derision and scream with scorn. But I want to suggest this morning that we look at this event in three different perspectives. First of all, I think there is a historical perspective that we need to understand, because this event did not merely happen out of the woodwork. It was part of a much bigger story that you must go back to the beginning of Joshua chapter 9 to understand. So let's go back there. Joshua chapter 9, as the Israelites are beginning to roll throughout the land of Canaan, there were several kings and groups of people throughout the land who decided to band together to fight Joshua and the Israelites. These were the kings of the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And I'm sorry if I've left out any other ites. No, that's all of them. There were 6 of them. They decided to band together to form a coalition so that they might fight against Joshua and the Israelites. They had heard about Jericho. They had heard about Ai. They knew that individually they could not stand against this force of God, and so they realized their only chance, although it was no chance at all, but they thought their only chance might be to band together. Now, in the midst of this, one of these groups really decides to double-cross the others. These were the Hivites. They were the people of the city of Gibeon. Gibeon was a large city. It was larger than Ai. It was also called, over in Joshua 10, verse 2, it is called a royal city. Many scholars think that Gibeon, rather than just being one localized community, was actually more of a metropolitan area comprised of several small villages in one single area. But the people of Gibeon decided, if you can't beat them, join them. They thought the thing they would do would be to go and try to make peace with the Israelites. Now, in order to do this, they had to practice deception. The Israelites had been commanded by God they were not to make a covenant with anyone who was within the land of Canaan. That was God's direct command. However, God did say that they were free to make covenants with foreign nations, nations that were not within the land of Canaan. Well, the Gibeonites were right there. In fact, they were only about 15 miles away from where the Israelites were camped at Gilgal. So it was as if the Gibeonites were living in BB. But they decided they would deceive the Israelites. So some of the men grew long beards, and they dressed in old, torn, worn-out clothes and sandals. And then they covered themselves with dust, making it look as if they had traveled for weeks on a long journey. And they came to the camp of Israel, and they told the Israelites, "We have come from a foreign nation." Emphasize the word foreign. "We have come a long distance. Please make a covenant with us, for we have heard of the power of your God. We have heard what happened." Listen to this. "To the kings of Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and of Og, the king of Bashan, who lived beyond the Jordan." Now, why did they choose those two kings? That was old history. If they had said, "We've heard about Jericho and about Ai," it would have been a giveaway, because news did not travel quickly in those days. And if they had said, "We've heard of Jericho and Ai," that would have been a tip-off. We're not from far away. But instead, they appealed to something that had happened much earlier, and that was Israel's defeat of the Hittite kings, or the Amorite kings, Sihon and Og. Well, the people of Israel were doubtful. They said, "Who are you?" And finally, Joshua comes to them and he says, "Who are you and where have you come from?" Now, these folks have their deception planned so cleverly. They take their knapsacks and they show Joshua this old, crumbly, moldy bread. And they say to Joshua, "This bread was fresh from the oven when we left home. And look at these old, worn-out wineskins full of sour wine. Why, when we left home, those wineskins were new." Now I want you to look at Joshua 9:14. It's a paramount verse. Israel did not consult the Lord. Israel did not consult the Lord. Isn't that remarkable? They made a covenant with these people, but they did not consult the Lord. Same thing happened when they went up against Ai the first time and were embarrassed by a humiliating defeat. They didn't ask God about it. They just did it. I think this is application time. I think there's a good application for all of us right here before we proceed any further. There are going to be times in your life when things are not as they seem to be. Because Satan is a liar and a deceiver. He makes temptation look profitable and sin look pleasurable. And the only way you're going to be able to know if you are being deceived by the one whom Paul says in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 14, who disguises himself even as an angel of light, the only way you're going to be able to know his deception is by consulting the Lord. There are going to be times in your life when things are not as they appear to be. You need to consult the Lord. Now, what happened to these other kings? what happened when they heard about, before I get into that, when Joshua heard 3 days later, Joshua hears that these Gibeonites, these men are not from far away, but they're from Gibeon. And he's angry. And he says, why have you deceived us? And they said, we didn't want to be overrun by you. Just you do with us what you want to do. And so Joshua and the Israelites say, here's the thing, you're going to be our slaves. Isn't that remarkable? These people of Israel who had been enslaved in Egypt, now they're enslaving others. They're saying, you're going to be our slaves. You're going to be our woodcutters and our water carriers for the tabernacle, for the house of God. Now, what happens when the other kings hear about this? Well, let's go to chapter 10. Chapter 10, there are 5 other kings. The king of Jerusalem is a guy by the name of Adoni-Zedek. Adoni-Zedek. And when he hears that they have been outfoxed by the Gibeonites, he immediately sends word to Horam, the king of Hebron, to Piram, who was the king of Jebuth, to Jopheth, who was the king of Lachish, and to a guy by the name of Debir, who was the king of Eglon. I hope I got all those right. And he says, we need to go up and wage battle against Gibeon because of what they have done. They have double-crossed us, those stinkers. We need to go up and war against them. So that's what their plan is. Well, when the people of Gibeon hear this, what do? They immediately send word to Joshua. And they say, Joshua, you made a covenant with us. Remember that covenant you made with us, that you would protect us? And now Adoni-Zedek and these other kings of the Canaanites are coming to war against us. Big brother, we need you now. Joshua does the right thing. He talks to God. And in verse 8 of chapter 10, God says, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. What God is doing is setting up a battle, a strategic battle. Joshua is fighting against all of these kings of all of these city-states at once. And after an all-night journey over rugged terrain, Joshua and the Israelites catch these Canaanite kings by surprise. They confuse them. The battle is a rout. Not only that, they begin fleeing. These other nations begin fleeing from Israel. Look down at verse 11. God starts stoning the other nations with hailstones from the sky, so that more of them were killed by the hailstones than by the Israelites. What a scene. God is picking these people off. These are pagan people. These were wicked people. These were people who had despised God, who had worshiped idols in terrible ways. And God's justice is making itself known. Well, down in verses 12 through 14, we come to the verses that really comprise our story. Then Joshua stood in the sight of all Israel and said, O sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon, stand still over the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until Israel avenged itself of its enemies. The sun stood still for almost a day. There has never been a day before or since that was like it. That's what the text says. Now, we read that, and suddenly all types of objections start kicking into our minds. And as I've been going through the book of Joshua this summer in my own personal study and consulting background and different things, this particular one, boy, let me tell you what, this is a ballyhoo. I mean, you read every kind of explanation of this that you can imagine. We know that the earth rotates on its axis. It makes one rotation every 24 hours, thus bringing the two hemispheres of the earth into light and darkness. And we know that is what to us brings about the appearance of the rising of the sun in the east and the setting of the sun in the west. We understand that. So, how did God bring this about? Did God slow down the rotation of the earth? Did God cause the rotation of the earth to stop? Somebody says, well, that's impossible because that violates the laws of nature. But may I remind you of the one who created the laws of nature. May I remind you of the one who spoke something out of nothing. Genesis 1, verse 1. And who said, let there be light, even before he created a great light to rule the day and another light to rule the night. Genesis 1, verses 14 through 16. So before you and I start saying something is impossible, we need to ask ourselves by whose standards? Is it impossible by man's standards? Yeah. By what our knowledge is. Yeah, we can't figure that out. I mean, and it's not just this miracle, but think of other miracles as well. Think of Peter walking on the water. Is that possible according to human standards? Have you tried it lately? No, not according to human standards. What about a blind man in the temple receiving his sight? Is that possible by human standards? Well, we've got wonderful medicines and procedures, and I'm grateful for those. Lord knows that. But it all goes back to your frame of reference. Jeremiah said in Jeremiah 32, "Ah, Lord God, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and outstretched arm. Nothing is too difficult for you." This is the theological perspective. And we've got to determine how we're going to look at life. Are we going to look at it merely through human wisdom, human eyes, human reasoning? Or do we look through faith that says, I serve a God who is powerful enough to do the unthinkable? Now, think, if you will, about the obedience perspective, and the lesson will be yours. I do not need to understand something to appreciate it and utilize it. I do not understand everything about electricity, but that didn't stop me from turning on my lights this morning. I don't understand everything about computers, but I work on a computer every single day, just about. I don't understand everything about physics and about various disciplines of science as Some of you who are scientists here in this church in various fields, I don't understand nearly as much about those things as you do, but it does not stop me from appreciating those things and making application of that knowledge to my life. In the same way, I don't understand all of the miracles that are recorded in the Bible. And if you ask me, how did God cause the sun to stand still for almost a day? I don't know. But through faith, I have no problem accepting it because I know who God is. And I know, as Isaiah said, that his ways are not my ways, and his thoughts are not my thoughts. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are his ways higher than my ways, and his thoughts higher than my thoughts. I don't understand COVID-19, but I believe in God. I believe in Scripture. Though it has been tested throughout time, it still stands. Though it's been banned and burned, it still stands. Though it has been criticized and ridiculed, it still stands. And I believe in the perspective of obedience that says faith means that when God says to do something, I simply say humbly, Lord, here am I. Here am I. I want to conclude by telling you this little story. It happened when I was in the second grade. I don't remember much from second grade, but I remember this. One afternoon after school, there were some big boys, Jim. They must have been fourth or fifth graders. They were picking on me. Now, I know you have a hard time believing anybody would pick on a kid as cute and innocent as I was. But seriously, they were just picking on me. I don't remember a lot about it, but I do remember this. All of a sudden, my big sister showed up. Now, Jan is my sister. She is my only sibling. She's 6 years older than me. By the way, today's her birthday. Say happy birthday, Jan. She may be watching, but when she showed up, those boys scattered. I mean, they scattered. And it occurs to me, all of us need someone who will fight for us. I'm thankful that we serve a God who fights for us like he fought for Israel. He loves you just that much that he's willing to fight for you when you are unable to fight for yourself. He is willing to do for you what you cannot do for yourself if you will accept him and have faith, trust, and obedience in him. This morning, will you come right now while we stand, while we sing?